Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be talking about the wonderful movie Brave the Dark. And I'm joined today by director Damian Harris and actor Jared Harris. And starting off with you, Damian, I wanted to talk about the genesis of this film because it's based on true story and true people. And the real life Nathan had originally written the first draft of this script and,
Yeah.
already worked on kind of editing it down from what was originally, everything from 4 years old to when he left high school. And I've loved how I've heard you describe the way in which you just immediately saw that the heart and the spine of this story was really the relationship between him and between Stan, who Jared plays in the movie. And I was interested in how, that realization really shaped so much of the story in terms of the continued script development and what we've ultimately ended up seeing on screen.
Yes. It, because it was because basically Nathan had written everything from the age of 5 to completing high school. It just felt that it was unwieldy as a movie script, and it's quite I'm it very rarely do I reach the end of a script and I'm actually moved to tears, but I was by this one, and it was because of the relationship and between Stan and Nate, and where they both arrived by the end of the movie, and the fact that he changes his name one last time and it's then to Deen. I found that very impactful, and then knowing that they actually can the going to Christmas at the orphanage was something they continued doing every year. And the actual script came out of Nate going to talking to foster kids about what lies ahead of them after they leave, after they age out, and needing to be open to people like Stan coming into their lives. And from that came the script. And I think that's why Stan and Nate's relationship is so integral to where Nate's journey ends up, um, rather than the sort of the first 2 chapters of it, which were him as a 6-year-old and then being in the orphanage.
Absolutely. And, Jared, you've spoken about how when you first read the script, when Damien first sent it to you, because the two of you will always kind of work on projects together in that way, just for feedback, that you kind of kept expecting there to be some revelation about him or a different side to him, and that you kind of ultimately realized he really is this altruistic and he really does have this really genuine, pure heart in him. And so once you started looking at how to play that, how did you make sure that it was coming across with such genuine feeling and not kind of being overly sentimentalized?
Yeah, that's a good question because it's tricky. I think because we are so cynical now, and we're always looking for the ulterior motive, and so it's maybe a comment on where our minds are at. Um, and that question was raised in the script, um, but I mean, it that got cut out because it didn't lead anywhere and it wasn't developed, and that was more that ended up being more of a kind of an indictment of the community, and it just didn't there just wasn't a place for it. That was in a way that was a to make that work you'd have to add another 30 minutes to this to the movie. um yeah, I mean, I think that everyone I spoke to, and it was constant. It was almost every day. They would tell you about their experiences with Stan. And when Damon and I met in Lancaster, we went out for dinner, and the guy who was looking after our table knew Stan. And when he asked us what we were doing here, and we told him, "Oh, you guys are making a movie." And he goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well," he looked at me again. "Well, you got some pretty big shoes to fill." And everybody said that. And you'd go and talk to parents or people who are now teachers who'd been taught by him, and everybody just had this very strong impression of him. So and I think that the avoiding the sentimentality thing is in those moments, uh, you can lean into it where you can have fun because um, he used to sing in the original script. He sang a lot of Barbara Streisand, but we couldn't afford Barbara. Um, But you sort of lean into those sort of musical theatre bits when they're appropriate, and other times you just let his heart crack just quickly and quietly, and then move on, and cover up, which is what we do anyway in life. We protect ourselves from strong emotions, and people don't weep openly in front of other people.
Exactly. I think that's so much of kind of the heart and the emotion at this story and the way that it's told. And, Damian, the way that you've kind of emotionally paced it is almost in line with the journey that Stan's encouraging Nate to go on. It's, there's a much bigger picture at the end of this, but you just have to make all these small steps towards it. And I was interested in approaching filmmaking and just thinking about, it doesn't need to be a monumental change in this scene. It just needs to be these small shifts. And ultimately that's what's going to build into the way that people feel at the end when they walk away from this.
Right. Well, I mean, you never want to give away where you're going to end up. The movies are about getting there. And so what I liked about what I felt I had in my back pocket about Stan was here's somebody who is a really good teacher, and he's the drama teacher and the English teacher, and he's really popular with his students. He gets on really well with them, and he has a conversation, he has a dialogue with them. Uh, and so he naturally thinks, how hard can it be to have a 17-year-old kid come and live with me, and me just basically guide them all the way to high school, not realizing really how difficult it's going to be, especially bringing in a 16, 17-year-old who's as messed up and as self-destructive as Nate is. So that's the middle of the film. I just got to let it get there and let it play out as a drama. And it will naturally evolve to where you go into the third act, which is, I think, this was something Jared brought to when we were doing the script, because he wanted part of Stan's drive to be understanding what is what is Nate's truth, and sort of delicately pushing him to find out what it is that happened so long ago to him that is causing him to basically not face it, but to act out the reaction to it. And I thought, oh, you know what? This film's also a mystery, and so it's basically Stan's character becomes a detective who's basically trying to unravel what the secret is Nate's secret is. So you've got two very strong engines in a drama going on at the same time.
No,
You
definitely.
mentioned monumental shift, and it's interesting because there is a monumental shift in the scene, but it's not in an obvious way. But it's in the scene which can we drop F-bombs here?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Oh, it's in the scene where Stan drops 54 F-bombs, and it's so shocking to Nate that he finally breaks through. And that scene doesn't exist in the American version, but it's so important to the version, to his story, because I remember when that scene, the original draft of that scene, it was just a whole series of F-bombs, and I remember looking at it going, "Oh, this is going to be difficult to do." And, the reason for it, and I spoke to Nate, about it. What his recollection of it was, he said that, well, he was trying to teach me a lesson. And so then Damon and I went back in and kind of structured it in a way so it leads up to something. So it's still Stan the teacher trying to grab hold of this moment, and for it to be a teachable moment and to break through to him. But that's the sort of the big monumental shift in the scene, is that scene. And as you know, and Damien, when he's mentioned several times, is Nate never swears again in the whole movie after that scene, because the penny drops for Nate.
Nor does Stan in his life,
Yeah.
probably.
No, it's such a great point, and Jared, I think there's so much in terms of the way that Stan very slowly draws Nate out of himself and kind of allows him to set his own parameters and boundaries over time. He's never pushing him to talk about things that he's not ready to talk about. And I feel like so much of that comes from the essence of what you and Nicholas Hamilton, who plays Nate in the movie, kind of created as scene partners. And how did you make sure that you were kind of finding that right energy and that right space for each other as your characters?
We rehearsed for a month beforehand and hung out, and became friends and trusted each other. And um, uh, And it was, it's a difficult journey as well for Nicholas's part, as because he's trying to find when to show the different things that are going on with him, the subterranean stuff, and it's quite a sort of it's quite a challenge to play someone who on the surface of it seems to have everything and is completely confident and cocksure of himself and has he's the star athlete and then but then there's this other hidden side that we're aware of as an audience, we slowly start to become aware of, and when to touch on those things and when to push it in the other direction. Because he was very brave as well, because he's quite obnoxious, and to rely on the fact that the story is going to bring you to a place with your relationship with the audience where they're properly going to understand what's going on with the character, and that takes a lot of courage to do that and a lot of faith in Damian.
Yeah, and Damian, because Jared was just mentioning the work that you did with Nicholas on, those kind of more insular moments, and especially when the memories of his childhood start gradually piecing together more and more, and we see this interspersed throughout the story, that's kind of twofold for you as a director, because you have the performance with Nicholas that you're working on, and then you also have the memories and the flashback scenes that you're shooting. And how did you kind of come up with visually just how you wanted that to come together on screen?
Well, the metaphor I used was like bubbles, air bubbles in water, where you might just have one coming up, and then later on you might have a collection of them. And then I also said to Nate, this is like a jigsaw puzzle. This is like a jigsaw puzzle, and you're getting pieces that don't really fit together, but you know that there's going to be a design later on. And so I had him, I wanted him to react um, in a way that he was, well, it was by degrees actually, because the first thing that he sees is a woman, and he's not sure who this woman is, and he realizes when he gets to his grandparents' house that he's been remembering his mother, and so it's sort of the first journey is there, is to putting an identity to this person that he's been seeing, and then basically it's kind of, Nate had said that it was only when he got to live with Stan that he had somewhere to sleep that was not in the back of his car, and it was not in a bedroom, in a sort of a dormitory, that these memories started to come back to him, and he started to be able to piece together, not knowing the whole picture, but knowing that the truth that he had been told by his grandparents and he had to repeat, there was something wrong there. And so then it forced him to, or it led to him going to investigate himself. Um, but in terms of shooting it, I just felt like I wanted it to be these kind of disparate images coming together as he was recognizing them until you get to the acid trip that sort of brings it all back together.
Yeah, and Jared, also going back to something that you were touching upon before, with the fact that you all filmed in the town where Stan lived, you were filming in the school that he used to teach at, and everybody you encountered in this town, not only knew him, but kind of became very integral to the making of the film, from financing it to giving food to giving locations, and that gave you such a wealth of resources in terms of people with stories and anecdotes and details about him. But I always think it's so interesting when you're playing characters who you want to kind of emulate and capture the essence of them authentically, but the general public doesn't know, well, how did they walk? How did they sound when they spoke? And, how did you find that version of what you felt like was going to honor him, but also had your own creative freedom to it as well?
There's a very good documentary on YouTube about Stan's last year at Garden Spot. I just watched that obsessively. And then there's a long recording of the very first screenplay. It was written by
John Spencer.
John Spencer and Nate, and it's more like a play really, because there's so much voiceover narration in it. Um, but they're reading this with Stan and talking about it, So I just had that playing the whole time in the place that I was staying. So it was just constantly surrounded by him and his voice, his his tone, his sense of humor, the way he reacted to things. I would watch stuff. Um, yeah, yeah, you just do what you always do. You immerse yourself in as much of the information as you can, and try and let things start to seep in.
Yeah. Damian, also talking about the way that you've made this film as a director, with independent filmmaking, obviously there's always time constraints, money constraints. And when you kind of look at a lot of these scenes, there's a lot of scenes which don't really cut away. And you've kind of used a lot of longer takes for things rather than getting coverage from 5 different angles. And I imagine that that's both a creative and an economical decision. And I was just interested in kind of conceptualizing your shot list and thinking about both of those things at the same time.
Well, absolutely true. Definitely, when you're looking at a 25-day shoot, you got to automatically you've got to think about how realistically you're going to make it. But also, it was it was a period movie, and so and it was really important that the audience knows that, because that movie would not exist. That story couldn't exist nowadays, because you literally would just go to the internet or pick up everybody's contactable by their cell phones. But the logic works that it's set in the 80s. So with the DP, I really wanted to make it look and feel like a 1980s movie, which is why we shot in the 2:3:5 ratio and the way we approached it. And they didn't have tons of coverage back in the 80s. I mean, in the 70s, 80s, they didn't think like that. And so we approached it with that was our concept, and then backed into it knowing also it helped us because we were making a movie in 25 days. And then Jared and Nicholas were very accommodating by basically saying, if I stand here, how long will it take? And I go, well, that will take 40 minutes. If you stand there, it'll take 15. And so they would go and stand where it would take 15 minutes for us to get ready.
I imagine, Jared, that you asking that question of the economics of, does it make more sense? Is it easier to shoot if I stand here or I move here? Comes from a wealth of experience. And I was interested, kind of,
Particularly
what
Mad
led to
Men.
you ask? Yeah, that was
It
where
was
that came
Mad
from for
Men.
you.
Yeah, because I mean, on Mad Men, the instructions for the directors was you had to hose down coverage, so that Matt had options in the editing room. And every time you turned and faced a new wall, it was a 45-minute relight. So every time, so you're going to shoot in all 4 walls. That's I can't, how many, 4 times 45 minutes. I have no idea what that is. What's that? That's 3 hours.
Right.
Yeah, that's 3 hours just relighting in each direction. So yeah, I was just aware of that and of trying to help move things along, because if you can, you can motivate yourself to be in a different spot for some reason. You find something that makes organic sense and it doesn't look weird, you know. But all the great directors do that. If you look at like Steven Spielberg's work, it came from television, because I was talking to the guy who directed. He's going to kill me now because I've forgotten his name, but he directed the very first episode of Doctor Who, which you can see online. And I was really impressed with the way he moved the camera and he moved the actors. And he said, "Well, you had to back then because there was a either production code or a union limit about how many cuts you could have within a scene. So you had to move the actors and you had to move the camera." And you can see that in Spielberg's work, is because he came up through TV. You've got to move the people around and move the camera around and move actors into a 2 shot and then over the shoulder and then have them move so you can pick up a single off of somebody.
Yeah.
And Damien was doing the same thing.
And also live television, like Sidney Lumet. I mean, that's when they're doing live television. They had to literally move the cameras around because there was nothing else to cut to.
Yeah.
So it was I Claudius is a great example of that, of blocking and camera movement.
There's also something exciting about it, because if you get it right, it creates a momentum and a tension to the scene and to the storytelling,
Yeah.
because we are subconsciously aware of whenever the cuts come.
It's so interesting, and that idea of, momentum and tension is so interesting in certain regards, Damien, particularly with the fact that you're kind of tasked with capturing this entire insular journey that's going on for Nathan throughout the entire story. We see this wealth and this almost storm of emotion that's inside him, and moments where he's literally trying to physically outrun the way that he's feeling. And how did
Right.
you set about finding how do I visually externalize all of these internal feelings that this character's having?
Well, that was, I mean, the running was Nate saying that that was his de facto go to whenever he was like trying to run away from a confrontation from feelings, which we shot. But I mean, I just let him be in the moment of what of how he was feeling or interacting, and didn't use a lot of cuts. And I'm not afraid to basically stay on those moments. Um, the running stuff was we shot at the sports grounds, and again there was this one shot that I did wanted to do, which is the race, which I wanted to all do in one take, so that you stay on his face, and the expression that he has is where he lands at the end when he wins the race, kind of tells you everything about um, him as an athlete and him as a competitor, I think, with the other kids, and feeling that he has a value to himself that he can, that means something to him, which is that he does this. This is something he comes to school, and the one thing that he really can do is he can outrun everybody else.
One of the scenes
And
I was,
then it's
oh,
paid
sorry.
off at the end with he you see all the other kids peel off and their parents come to him. Their parents come to them,
Yeah.
and then he's on his own because there's no one there to greet him. There's no one there for him, even though he's won the award and he won and everything. It ends up just getting chucked into the trunk of his car.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely. One of the other scenes that I wanted to ask you both about, because I think it's such a lovely moment in terms of Nate's journey, is that scene where he's in the school theater and he's putting up some of the art pieces for some of the set pieces for the production that they're working on. And he just starts, completely feeling loose and free. And it's the first time that you kind of feel like he has managed to step outside of himself, and he's dancing around on stage. And then Stan comes in with some of the other students, and rather than stopping, they just join in as they're coming in. And so I just wanted to ask about that coming together, because I feel like that's such a step forward for Nate in terms of his whole arc.
Yeah, that was exactly that reason. I think that was the first time you really feel that Nate's taken two or three steps forward and feeling comfortable. He likes music. We know he listens to music, when he's in his car and he's alone. And so it just felt like he's on this stage. He's never danced before. He just feels comfortable enough to be able to do it and be goofy. And then Stan leads the other students back into the theater. And yeah, they
I can't remember. I just started dancing. I think is what I was doing when we came.
you start
I
dancing, and then
started
the other
because I
students
just
start
felt
dancing
like
too.
he would join in, and
Yeah,
and it would be, it was sort of gently teasing him,
yeah.
um, but not trying to make him feel awkward or embarrassed.
I think you were genuinely going to cast him in your next musical.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
That was one of the things again that people would say was that Stan had this sort of thing. One of his things was he'd see somebody at the school who was on the outs, someone who was being ostracized and starting to drift away, and he'd take that person and he'd put them in the play and he'd give them a part where they had a moment where they would shine, and then their relationship, the school's attitude, the student body's attitude towards that person would completely shift. And and often the parents would say, you changed what did you do? You changed my child's life. What did you do? He just gave him a moment to shine.
Hmm. One of the other things, Damien, that I wanted to ask you about in terms of the writing process, kind of going back to the idea of music in this film, because the music feels so integral. And I love that you have these two characters who have completely different pop cultural references to each other, and you have music that represents all of that, because I've heard you say that you tend to use music and create a playlist for yourself whenever you're writing anything. And
Yeah.
particularly looking at the way that it infiltrates into the story here, how did that part of the process really help shape the sounds that we end up hearing throughout the film?
Well, I mean, the replacements had to be in there. Bastards of None, that song, just the title, and those boys singing that song. So that was in the script, and so was the Flock of Seagulls. Um, there were some other songs that we couldn't afford. For the longest time, Jared's "Don't Rain on My Parade" was Stan, sorry, was definitely in the script, and we were trying desperately to somehow get the rights to that. And then I think we talked to Jared and I talked about him, the idea of him, I mean, originally it was Laurence Olivier reading Hamlet, and so we had that, and
Louis V.
that just felt absolutely that's something that he would do and be playing to himself at home, um, and
But he had a frustrated desire to be a great actor, a great Shakespearean actor, and he loved Shakespeare. So it was all I felt appropriate.
yeah,
Um,
and
yeah,
he loved musicals too.
he did.
Yeah.
There's no getting around that.
Which is that you're right in terms of you have Nate's love of punk and pop, and then you have the Broadway music,
I
which
imagine there was some arguments over what station on the radio was going to be on in the house.
that's true.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that was placed. That was in the script mostly, and then for the mother as well. I wanted the Doobie Brothers, South City Midnight Lady, as the song that was the song that she played that brought Nate back to the 70s. And we actually go with the Harry Chapin song. And so when he hears that at the sort of the kids are all dancing to that when he's like tripping. That reminds him of when his mother was dancing with her new boyfriend to that song. Um,
I remember that was something that we sort of came to when we started shooting, was the idea that there was a sort of it was because we put that moment in the car where Nate turns to Stan and asks for help
yes,
with something that Stan can't help him with, because he's got no experience of it and he doesn't know how to help him. So it's one of the only times in the story where Nate asks for help from Stan, and Stan is stumped. He doesn't know what to do, and that there's this, there's the idea, there's the fear, which um, uh, there's that sort of slightly corny line about the apple not falling too far from the tree, which actually was true. That's what the grandparents would say to Nate, and that the idea is that he could become like his father, and that moment in the tripping scene in the party when he sees his ex-girlfriend making out with somebody else, that he could become violent, but he makes a choice not to do that and turns away, and the violence becomes towards himself.
Mhm. No, it's a really
But that
it's a
wasn't there. That wasn't there in the original script. That was something that Damian found as we were starting to, you write the script, you explore the story in your imagination and everything, but it's only when you start doing it that you really start to understand what it is that you're doing and what the story is that you're telling. That's
Absolutely. And
what, for
it's so
me.
interesting to hear all these details of how this all came together. And I think it's such like an intimate story that's so intricately told. So appreciate both of you talking about this today. Thank you so much.
thank
Oh,
you.
thank you.